Pachinko has just returned to our screens with the first episode of Season 2, and this first episode was primarily focused on the tension and fear that was present in Osaka in 1945 throughout the Second World War, the view of Korean people in Japan at the time, and also the parallels in the struggles between Sunja and also Solomon 40 years later. With Season 1 being incredibly well regarded, let's delve into this first episode of Season 2 and break down all that there was to take away from it. Here is Pachinko Season 2 Episode 1 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. I'm going to break this video down by the different characters as there were many different arcs occurring. Sunja. Within the 1945 timeline, we saw that Sunja was in a position where she was struggling in the slums. The stall that we saw her set up in the Season 1 finale was doing well for the most part, and the whole Taste of Home motto was what was leading the success. However, the supplies were running low, which meant that she wasn't making as much money, which also meant that herself and her children were going hungry. As well as that, her husband Isak was arrested and was being held in prison, which was something that was also making the struggles even worse. During the opening part of the episode, we saw what it felt like this timeline was going to be focused on, and that was the bombings that were on the horizon of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Two bombs that were dropped on Japan in the Second World War, which claimed the lives of between 110,000 and 200,000 people, depending on which source you trust. As well as that, the bombing of Osaka in June 1945, which is said to have killed 10,000 civilians. With the leaflets being dropped from the American planes, the paper read a warning which said that if Japan didn't surrender, then things would get worse. Something which Sunja struggled to believe because things were already at an extreme low point for her and her family. As well as Isak being in prison, we found out that Yoseb was recruited to work in a munitions factory in Nagasaki, something which most definitely means that he's going to be injured or killed as the season develops when the bomb does finally drop. Mr. Kim was an important figure in this episode during the beginning, as he bought the kimchi from Sunja and was interacting with Mozasu. Mozasu said how he felt like Mr. Kim was some kind of spy, and that did ultimately turn out to be the case, but in a non-hostile way, but we'll get to that in a bit. Sunja had a powerful conversation in this episode where it was almost focused on the struggles of being a woman, a mother, and also being Korean, showing that her life was this constant uphill battle and fight that she needed to overcome in many different ways. This was what ultimately led her to go off and work at the black market in creating rice wine to sell there, something which was against the law, and if she was caught then she'd be arrested. This ended up occurring and she was taken away. It was once she was arrested where we heard a conversation taking place between the people that were being held there where they said that they wanted the old judge because he was fair, because the young one wasn't. This was then when the young judge walked in, and upon asking for Sunja's name, he said that she was free to go and to not count on luck next time. This sparked the question of why it was that she was able to be freed so easily by the harsh judge. But then the questions were answered. Mr. Kim was waiting for her with a car, and once she got in it and arrived at a property, Hansu walked out and revealed that Mr. Kim had worked for him for several years and was keeping an eye on Sunja and her children and was making sure that they were safe. Hansu was the person that also got her off the charges and jail sentence that she was going to be facing, most likely due to the influence that he has. During their conversation, we saw the material that he had in the opening section of the episode that was within the boxes. Tungsten, a material which is utilized in missiles and weapons, and it was sitting on the desk. This was what then led him to speak to Sunja about the bombs that were going to be dropping, and that this time it was an inevitability. He knew things that others didn't, and he wanted to get Sunja and the two children out to the countryside to safety so they wouldn't be impacted by them. However, Sunja revealed that she wasn't going to be leaving Osaka because she was waiting for Isak to return home from prison. Hansu was surprised and said, "You actually care about him." Something which showed that he was almost jealous of the love that she had for him and that it was something that he didn't think would get in the way of her leaving. Hansu genuinely looked upset at the prospect of her not going with him, so I don't think he's going to give up that easily. I'm going to guess that Sunja will go to the countryside because within the Season 2 trailer there was a shot of her there with planes flying overhead. So maybe Hansu will be able to utilize his influence in order to get Isak out of jail if that's the deciding factor on Sunja leaving. Within the 1989 timeline, there was one scene in particular that really resonated with me, and I think it had a large impact. It was in contrast to the shot of Sunja walking into the black market where she was pretty much at her lowest point and was questioning what to do. Within the 1989 timeline, we saw her looking at the door at Pachinko, which was having its celebration, and she was looking at how busy it was, and with that, she had a smile on her face before it turned to a look of reflection. I feel it was almost symbolic of the journey that Sunja had been on throughout her life, and that she was now at a point where she was looking back on the struggles of the slum in comparison to what was right in front of her. However, only moments later, she was on the receiving end of racism and discrimination at the dawn of a new decade in 1989 in the store, showing that even though other parts of her life had changed and she'd bettered them, the mindset amongst some of the people there was still present. Solomon. Within the 1989 timeline, we saw that Solomon's deal that he messed up in Season 1 was still following him around as he was looking for investors. He has 3 months worth of money left before he's broke, and Solomon is the character that primarily focuses on the theme of power in the show, as that's something that he's always had. However, this first episode showed that not only was he struggling to get people to believe in him and for investors to back him, but he was also on the receiving end of discrimination too. Something which meant that because the power struggle was there, it was changing the type of person that he was. There were parallels between the young Sunja and the 1989 Solomon in this episode, especially with the struggles that they were going through and them being at the lowest point that they'd been at. When Solomon was in the meeting, he said, "Tokyo has 11 million people, but it still feels like a village." The show was pretty much comparing what Sunja did back in the 30s and 40s in order to survive with how Solomon was looking at getting out of the rut that he felt he was in. As the episode went on, we saw that his father gave him 100 million because he believed in him, and he was also given 200 million by Tetsuya as a repayment for being kind to him when he was younger. However, by the end, Tetsuya had to retract the offer because Abe-san didn't trust Solomon, and the deal that he made in Season 1 which he went back on was continuously lingering in the shadows. This was what caused the outburst that he had at the worker in the store for being discriminatory towards his grandmother. It was interesting that he turned to the money that he once earned in the argument and compared it to the person opposite him when it came to his sense of belonging and the power that he's so desperately trying to hold on to. Solomon is at rock bottom in this season, and he currently has no purpose or sense of belonging, so it's going to be interesting watching him navigate the space and trying to find a sense of purpose and identity again. Noa. Noa is a character that I'm already extremely intrigued by within this season. We saw that he himself was being ridiculed for having Koreans that were living with him, and they were being referred to as pigs by the other students. As well as that, we saw that he also wasn't reaching his full potential in class. We heard him mention how his teacher just stood by and allowed him to be bullied, when in reality, it very much felt like the teacher was almost living in fear a little bit as well, because he was hiding the fact that he was Korean, but he revealed it to Noa. We heard Noa mention how he wanted to stay in Osaka despite the fact that his teacher believed that he was destined for better things and that his intelligence was what would lead him to get out of the slums. However, like Sunja, he was waiting for his father to be released from prison and return home before doing anything else, ultimately not wanting him to feel abandoned. Something that I thought was interesting was the fact that Noa was reading The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, showing that he clearly had this burning desire for adventure within his life, but the burden of his father being sent away and the bullying that he was on the receiving end of was probably restricting his potential. So I imagine we'll have true character development within this season of the show with Noa. My review of the episode. I thought this first episode of Season 2 was strong. I thought it kickstarted the season really well and re-immersed us back into the world in a natural way and allowed us to pick up in a slightly different time. What's great about this show is that both of the different timelines that we followed in episode 1 were just as engaging as one another, and you never really felt the burning desire to get back to the other one because they're both so immersive and engaging. With the bombs being dropped on the horizon, that's something which is like a drone underneath everything, and it's going to be at the heart of the decisions that are getting made in the 1945 timeline. From a stylistic perspective, and not necessarily a storytelling perspective, this show is gorgeous on the eye, and it really encapsulates what the 80s look like really well. That graininess and the color palette just seems spot on. In terms of the performances by the cast, there simply isn't a weak link. Every character is performed so well, from the lesser seasoned actors all the way up to the more experienced ones. You feel the pain that they're suffering and sympathize with them when that emotion needs to be evoked, so it's a great job from the entirety of the cast. In terms of the runtime, considering it was just over 50 minutes, it absolutely flew by, but I think that's because the story is just so strong. With a week to wait until episode 2, I can't wait to see what's going to happen next. So, there you have it, Pachinko Season 2 Episode 1 Ending Explained. If you want to see more videos on Pachinko, then click on the card in the top corner. There's an entire playlist there with episodes broken down. Or alternatively, you can head over to my channel where you'll find them all. What did you think of the first episode? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.